what clings to the road. My universe was the cabin of my Peterbilt, a 3 cubic meter cosmos smelling of thermos coffee, diesel, and the loneliness of 1,000 miles. I'd been driving for 2 days straight, heading south from Phoenix, Arizona, towards my home in Hermosillo, Sonora. Outside, the desert didn't sleep. It just held its breath beneath a blanket of stars so bright and cold they looked like shards of glass. The highway, Interstate 10, was a blacktop scar on the Earth's dark skin, a straight, hypnotic line whispering in your ear to loosen your eyelids, to let the Cummins engines hum carry you away. But I couldn't. I'd promised Leo I'd be there for his birthday. 7 years old. He'd made me pinky swear that this time there'd be no urgent cargo. The image of his face, serious and expectant, was the only beacon keeping me awake. The radio was off. At that hour of the morning, there were only preachers promising salvation or Spanish-language shows selling miracle cures. I preferred the silence, the internal monologue that forms on the road. I was thinking about what I'd tell the insurance company about a little ding I'd given a pole in the loading yard, about the taste of the machaca my wife would make me, about normality. Blessed, boring normality. And that's when normality decided to abandon me on that highway. It burst from the darkness on the right. It wasn't an Animal Crossing. It was an eruption of movement, a blur of pure mass and speed that lunged into the beam of my headlights. My brain barely had time to register the shape, too large for a coyote, too dense for a deer, before the impact. The hit was dry, obscene. A thump that felt less like a sound and more like a fracture in the truck's very soul. The entire frame vibrated, the steering wheel bucked in my wrists, and my foot slammed on the brake out of pure reflex, but it was useless. At 60 miles an hour, I knew what had just happened. I'd disintegrated it. There'd be nothing left to recognize, just a bloody lesson for the vultures to learn at dawn. But as the truck shrieked and slowed, I heard something that didn't fit. A sound that shouldn't be there. The sharp, terrible screech of metal being gouged. My heart stopped. Over the edge of my massive red hood, just where my sight usually drifted off, something emerged. 5 claws. Thick as old roots, black and polished like obsidian. They dug into the sheet metal with a force that dented the hood, clinging on as my 40-ton beast continued to slide across the asphalt. Panic flooded me like icy water. Whatever I had hit wasn't under my wheels. It had climbed on top. Slowly, as the claws readjusted with an unsettling intent that churned my stomach, the head appeared. It was a wolf's or something that mimicked one. The fur was a dead gray, matted and filthy, clinging to a skull that seemed too large. The snout opened, revealing a palisade of bone needles. But that wasn't what broke me inside. It was the eyes. They were a feverish, bright yellow. But they weren't an animal's. I swear on my life. There was an intelligence in them, a malevolence that drilled through the glass. They were the eyes of a person consumed by the deepest hatred. And they were staring at me. In that instant, the world stopped making sense. All my knowledge of the road, of animals, of physics, vanished into smoke. I let out a sound I didn't know I could make, halfway between a sob and a scream, and did the only thing I could think of. I floored the accelerator. The engine roared like a roused beast, and the truck surged forward. The creature hunched against the wind, its claws sunk into my hood, and I heard, above the engine's din, a guttural growl of pure agony. And then an even worse sound. A horrifying rhythmic grinding of flesh and bone against the asphalt. Its hind legs. It was dragging them, shredding them against the pavement at over 70 miles an hour. And still it wouldn't let go. The truck shook. The outside world was a tunnel of darkness and fleeting light. And then, suddenly, it was gone. The claws disappeared. The head vanished. I held my breath. A second later, I felt a series of dull, violent thuds beneath the cab, as if my own truck was trying to vomit something heavy and deformed. I wrestled with the steering wheel to keep steady, and then nothing. Only the roar of the engine. My own solitary roar in the night. I didn't slow down. I couldn't. I kept driving, knuckles white, eyes fixed on the road, expecting to see that blur in the darkness again. 20 minutes later, which felt like an eternity, I saw the artificial glow of a service station. A small beacon of normality. I swerved in, parked my rig at the back alongside other sleeping giants, and cut the engine. Silence fell on me like a tombstone. I sat there, unable to release the steering wheel. The metallic taste of fear coated my tongue. Outside, the station lights seemed dim, unable to touch the deeper shadows gathering between the trucks. I had to get out. I had to know. I opened the door, and the cold desert air helped me think. With my trembling flashlight in hand, I walked to the front. The light revealed a butchery. The hood looked as if it had been attacked with a sledgehammer and a rake. The metal was dented, scratched, torn. I found tufts of gray hair, coarse and stiff like wire, and bloodstains, but it was too dark, thick and opaque like crude oil. As I stood there, I saw a light flick on in one of the nearby cabs. The murmur of a radio. Someone else was awake. That small sign of life gave me the courage I needed. I knelt and aimed the flashlight under the truck. I followed the trail of dark drips. Past the front wheels, the diesel tank. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached the rear axle. I held my breath and moved the beam towards the differential. And my world ended for the second time that night. Clinging to the chassis, folded in on itself like a broken insect, was a man, or what was left of one. He was naked, his pale skin glistening with a layer of that black blood, and it seemed to steam slightly in the cold air. He was covered in terrible wounds. His hands were large, gnarled, ending in those same black claws, now dug into the metal. His legs. God, his legs were a shattered mass of bone and flesh. They weren't human. They were bent backward like a dog's. Until that moment, his head had been hanging down. I hadn't seen his face. As if sensing my gaze, he groaned. A low, broken sound. And he lifted his head. I aimed the flashlight directly at his face. It was a human face, but everything was wrong. The skin was so taut over his cheekbones and jaw that it looked like the bones were shifting underneath, struggling to reshape themselves. His nose was barely a flattened snout. His mouth was a wide, lipless gash full of small, sharp teeth. He had pointed ears. And the eyes. They were enormous, dilated to the brim, and reflected my flashlight's beam with a fury so pure, so concentrated, it stole my breath. That thing knew who I was. And in its gaze, there was nothing of a beast. It was a judgment. The accident hadn't been an accident. It had been the beginning of something. Hey, everything all right? A voice made me jump. Two men, other truckers, stood by my mangled hood. The creature under the truck heard them too. It growled, a sound that vibrated in the air and let go. It fell to the ground with a wet thud. Before it moved, its eyes met mine one last time, and from its ruined mouth came a guttural sound, like a word choked in blood. You. Then, crawling with terrifying speed, it vanished into the darkness on the other side. I ran, circling the truck, as the other men asked me questions I couldn't hear. There was nothing. It was gone. Just then, an old man stepped out of his cab. "Did you see that?" he said, his voice trembling. I swear I just saw a naked man running on all fours between the trailers. I looked at him, and I knew he wasn't crazy, and that was the worst news of all. Days later, back home, the insurance guy looked at me with pity as I stammered something about an animal, a very large animal. They denied my claim, of course. They said the damage wasn't consistent with a collision. They were right. Now I'm here. It's Leo's birthday. He laughs as he chases his cousins around the yard. My wife brings me a beer, smiles, and asks why I'm so quiet. I tell her it's exhaustion. But it's not that. It's just that ever since that night, I can't stop staring into the darkness. I feel like the road is watching me, that something I left half dead on it hasn't forgotten. And as I watch my son play in the sun, terror chills me from within, because sometimes when night falls I seem to see, just down the street where the lamplight doesn't reach, two small, faint points of yellow light. Watching. Waiting. I know that at some point the road will come to collect its debt.